I didn't feel it coming. One moment I was at my desk flipping through spreadsheets, the numbers blurring into each other like static on a broken screen. The next, the floor rushed up to meet me and I was gasping for air that wouldn't come. My chest cinched tight as if a fist had wrapped around my lungs. I remember the panic in my coworkers' voices chairs, scraping someone shouting, "Call 911," and then darkness. Before you click away, tell me in the comments, have you ever been the one holding your family together while no one held you? I want to know because stories like mine aren't just about betrayal, they're about survival, about finally choosing yourself when no one else will. If you've ever carried that kind of weight, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because peace isn't given, it's claimed. And the next chapter, you don't want to miss it. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the office anymore. White light glared overhead. The steady beep of machines echoed like a cruel reminder that they were the only reason I was still alive. Wires clung to my chest, cold, sticky, invasive. A nurse's calm voice told me I'd had a cardiac event. I didn't even know what that meant, but the way she looked at me firm, serious, like I'd brushed up against death and barely stepped back, told me it was more than stress, more than skipping meals or sleeping badly. Something inside me had finally broken. They told me they'd called my parents. I clung to that at first, even in my haze. Surely they would come. Surely the sight of their daughter collapsed at 31 years old would jolt them into remembering I was more than a safety net. Hours passed. Nurses changed shifts. Doctors rotated in and out. No one came. The silence grew heavier, pressing down against the beeping monitors. By the second day, I couldn't hold it in. I reached for my phone with trembling hands, praying for even a single message. There was one notification. Just one. Melissa had tagged me in a photo. My sisters Melissa and Paige and my parents sat by the lake on a picnic bench. Mom had even made her deviled eggs, the ones she only ever bothered with on holidays. They were all smiling, drinks raised. The caption read, "Family Day without the drama." I stared until the screen went black. My chest tightened not from the monitors, but from something worse. They hadn't just ignored me, they were celebrating my absence. That post hurt more than the collapse itself, because it told me the truth. I had been too exhausted to admit they didn't see me as family anymore. Maybe they never really had. The collapse hadn't come out of nowhere. My body had been screaming at me for months, headaches that wrapped around my skull like a vice, dizzy spells that made the walls tilt, chest pains I told myself were just stress. But I brushed it off every time. Who had the luxury of slowing down when bills kept piling up? When voices at home kept reminding me I was the responsible one. It had always been that way. Mom would call about her car payment, her voice dripping with helplessness. "If I lose the car, I can't get to work. Don't you care about your mother?" So I covered the loan. Melissa would text about another emergency, a flat tire, a broken phone rent due early, and somehow those emergencies always ended with photos of new clothes or plane tickets to Miami. Paige wanted deposits for her apartments, co-signatures for her boutique ventures, and Dad slipped his mortgage late fees into conversations like casual weather updates. "We'll figure it out, right, Ev? You've got that good job." And I always said yes. I always pulled out my card, transferred money, picked up shifts, patched the holes, until my whole life felt like one endless emergency room, me trying to resuscitate problems I didn't create. At work, I wore exhaustion like a uniform. I forced smiles, stayed late, volunteered for projects that weren't even mine. People called me dependable, reliable, but no one saw how thin I was stretched, how every night I crawled into bed with my chest pounding and whispered to myself, "Just make it to Friday." Sometimes when I was alone, I thought back to high school, to the way I used to come home proud of a good grade, a ribbon and honor roll certificate. Mom would glance at it and say, "Did you thank your teacher?" as if my effort wasn't worth noticing. Meanwhile, when Melissa crashed her second car in 3 months, Mom stroked her hair and said, "She's just under pressure." When Paige skipped weeks of classes, Dad shook his head but paid for tutoring. They always had excuses. They always had grace. For them, not for me. I was the fixer, the invisible support beam, the background character holding up their world. They didn't see me until something broke, and then they blamed me for not holding it together. So I trained myself to ignore the warning signs. Fatigue wasn't fatigue, it was discipline. Headaches were a sign I was pushing hard enough. Heart palpitations, just adulthood. And the gnawing loneliness whenever I sat at family dinners watching them laugh and talk over me. That was the price of being the strong one. But lying there in the hospital staring at that cruel photo on my phone, I realized something I should have seen years ago. I hadn't just ignored the warning signs. I had silenced them. I had treated my own body, my own worth, like another overdue bill, something to be dealt with later, but later had finally come and it had nearly killed me. I thought the worst part would be the pain, the hot wire sizzle under my ribs, the ache that pulsed whenever I shifted. It wasn't. The worst part was the quiet. Hospitals have their own kind of weather air conditioning that hums like a tired choir, curtains that move with a ghost's patience, monitors that speak in little green truths. In that weather, the absence of footsteps with my last name on them became its own storm. Nurses came and went, their hands efficient and kind. Someone refilled the water. Someone checked a chart. Nobody said your family is here. I watched the door anyway, like a dog staring at a driveway that never fills. When the quiet stretched thin enough to snap, I reached for my phone. One new notification, a red badge blinking like a wound. 77 missed calls stacked like a tower I had to dismantle with my thumb. Dozens of messages. Not one asked if I was okay. Dad's text sat in the middle, rigid and blue. We need you. Answer immediately. No hello. No, are you there? Just the same rope I'd let them tie around my life tossed again from the other side. For a minute, I considered answering the old reflex, flexing like a muscle I used too often, fix, soothe, pay patch. But the IV line tugged when I moved. The heart monitor thumped its steady metronome. The beeping sounded like a spine saying, stand up, and for once, I listened. I turned the phone face down and let it vibrate against the tray, a trapped insect, a small frantic thing that wasn't my responsibility anymore. The vibration traveled through the metal into my skin. It felt like all the years I'd smiled through the ache translated into a buzz I could finally set aside. It kept going. Melissa's name, then Paige's, then Mom, with 3 exclamation points as if punctuation were love. I didn't pick up. I watched the ceiling tile with the hairline crack running through it and thought, that's me. The crack nobody notices until the plaster falls. Sometime between an antibiotic push and a cardiology round an old memory uncurled me at 12, carrying home a certificate printed on cheap parchment Principal's Award in cursive. Mom barely glanced up from the stove. Did you thank your teacher? She asked, already scraping scrambled eggs. I said yes, and that was that. Later that month, Melissa borrowed my allowance for the first time and called me selfish when I hesitated. Dad laughed and said, be a good sister. It felt small back then, like lint on a sweater. Lint becomes a film becomes a layer. One day you look down and you don't know whose sweater you're wearing anymore. A nurse with soft eyes adjusted my oxygen and asked if I needed anything. I wanted to say I need a different childhood. I asked for water instead. The straw tasted like pennies. The water tasted like relief. Before she left, she touched the side of the monitor and lowered the alarm volume. We'll keep it steady, she said. The words landed in a place my family never reached. We'll keep it steady. Not, what can you do for us? Just steadiness offered without a bill attached. By the time the sun crawled through the slats and laid pale ladder rungs across the sheet, I knew I couldn't keep my own door propped open for people who only came to take. The thought frightened me. What do you become when you stop being the one who pays, who apologizes, who explains an uncooperative daughter? The villain in someone else's story. The beeping kept time while those questions circled. Finally, my thumb found a name I hadn't used in months, because pride is a high tariff and shame even more expensive, Grandpa. He answered on the second ring. Which hospital, he said, like we were in the middle of a sentence he'd been waiting years to finish. Not what happened. Not, are you sure? A street map of action delivered in 3 words. I told him. He said I'm on my way and hung up. That was the first time in days I felt unhooked from the feeling that my life was a service line. 40 minutes later, I smelled him before I saw him winter on a windbreaker machine oil on a watch band the faint tobacco he quit a decade ago, but never stopped carrying in his coat fibers. He stood in the doorway and looked at me like I was a person and not a problem. So he murmured, taking the chair they finally broke you too. The words weren't accusation. They were a diagnosis for a different kind of illness. He didn't touch the pity voice people use like bubble wrap. He took my hand, rough palm against my paper wrist, and let silence be a soft place. He stayed. He read the whiteboard. He learned the names of nurses without turning it into a performance. When the resident came through with clipped explanations, Grandpa put his glasses on and asked the kind of questions that make doctors respect you. What's the plan for discharge support? What's the medication schedule? What are the red flags? He didn't speak for me. He stood beside me. In the pause between the resident's phrases, he looked at me the way he did when I was 10 and trying to haul a canoe alone, a look that says, I know you're strong. I'm here anyway. In the late morning, he pulled a battered notebook from his windbreaker and clicked a pen with a decisive little snap. Let's make a list, he said. I felt my stomach knot. Lists in my family always meant to-dos for me, payments, apologies, groceries, rides. But this one was different. He wrote Evelyn at the top like it was a title. Then he drew a line and told me to talk. The words came in fits like a faucet spitting air before water. Car payments that weren't mine. Credit cards that didn't live in my wallet. Deposits I'd made and forgotten because forgetting is the only way you survive a drip you can't stop. Grandpa didn't scold me for any of it. He didn't say, "Why would you do that?" Or "I told you so." He only wrote underlining twice. "Your money is your health is your time." He sat back, pen against his lip, and added almost to himself, "Loyalty is only as good as the people you're loyal to." The sentence landed with the gentle clarity of a bell. Not loud, not showy. True enough to rearrange furniture in my chest. My phone buzzed through the afternoon like a trapped hornet. "Mom, we're worried." Then, "Your grandfather is filling your head with nonsense." Melissa, a screenshot of a nearly empty checking account with the caption "Fix this now." Paige took the Saints route I don't want to fight. Please call. Let's just be a family. I set the phone to Do Not Disturb and felt a new quiet drip into the room, a clean quiet, the kind that isn't empty but spacious. Every time the heart monitor ticked, it sounded like a nail going into a doorway I was finally framing for myself. Breaking points in movies are loud plates, hurled tires, screeching lines shouted across rain. Mine was the opposite. It was the moment my thumb hovered over callback and didn't. It was the moment I told the nurse to remove my mother from the emergency contact sheet and add Grandpa instead. It was the moment I slid Dad's letter, "We need you," into the drawer with the plastic spoon and let it live with things designed to be disposable. No fireworks, just small paperwork done in ink that wouldn't wash off. While the afternoon stretched, Grandpa dozed in the chair, arms crossed chin, dipped the metronome of his breath, syncing with the monitor's quiet choir. I watched him and realized how rare it is to be accompanied by someone who doesn't demand a role in your recovery. When he woke, he rubbed his face, checked his watch, and said, "Tomorrow we start turning off the taps." He said it like a weather report, nothing vengeful in it, no relish. Just the fact of a storm departing. My chest loosened in a way the nitro hadn't touched. I imagined the taps as braided cords running from my veins to my parents' house to Melissa's shoe closet to Paige's boutique with its paper-thin profit margin. I pictured those cords buried under years of nice girl soil root systems I kept watering with apologies and auto-transfers. Turning them off wouldn't be an explosion. It would be the quiet twist of a wrist, the final click of a valve that should never have been open. Night crept in through the blinds, cutting the room into equal parts shadow and hospital sky. I lay there with the salt taste of old fear finally thinning. The IV hissed. The machines breathed. Somewhere a cart rattled over tile, a lullaby of metal and work. I could almost hear my mother's voice from a different decade. "Be a good girl." and for once, the words didn't hook under my ribs. Being good had meant being available. Being alive would mean something else. The nurse came to check my vitals and smiled when she saw Grandpa's name on the contact sheet. "You've got good backup," she said. I nodded. Good backup, and for the first time, a plan that served me. When she left, I pressed the call button not because I needed anything, but because it felt like practice asking without apologizing. The speaker crackled. "How can I help you?" the voice asked. I almost said, "Nothing, sorry," out of habit. Instead, I said, "Could I have another blanket?" When it arrived warm from the dryer, I tucked it under my chin and thought, this is what help feels like when it's clean. Before sleep rinsed the edges of the day, I opened the Notes app and typed a single line, "No more emergency daughter." I stared at the sentence until it stopped shaking. Then I added another "tomorrow cancel change clothes." The plan wasn't a roar. It was a door swinging softly on new hinges, and as I drifted off Grandpa's pen scratch still faintly in my ears, I felt the first draft of a life that might finally belong to me. The next morning, Grandpa returned before breakfast trays clattered through the halls. He carried 2 coffees, one steaming, one lukewarm, because he knew I'd sip slowly, and a yellow legal pad fat with scribbles. He set them both on my tray with a decisive tap. "It's time to pull the plug," he said. His voice was calm, but beneath it hummed the quiet voltage of someone who had seen this kind of storm before. For a second, fear pinched me. Cutting them off wasn't just money. It was identity. Who was I if I wasn't the one patching holes? But then I looked at the plastic ID bracelet digging into my wrist, at the bruises blooming from IV sticks, and realized I was already someone else. Someone who had stopped answering. We started with Melissa. For years, she had a transfer set up from my account. Always temporary. Always just this once. I had normalized it the way you normalize a leaky faucet, annoying at first, then just part of the house. Grandpa pulled up the screen on my phone, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Ready?" he asked. My finger hovered for a beat, shaking. Then I pressed cancel. A blue checkmark appeared. That was it. No thunderclap, no explosion. Just silence. But it was a silence that felt like air rushing into a collapsed lung. Next came Paige's rent deposit, the one I'd been paying since she moved out 2 years ago. She always promised to pay me back once the boutique took off. The boutique had taken off into debt. I found the auto draft, toggled it off, and changed the password. My stomach twisted not with guilt, but with a strange lightness, like dropping a heavy bag you'd forgotten you were carrying. Mom's car insurance was harder. Her voice echoed in my head. "If I lose the car, I lose my job. Do you want me on the street?" For years, that guilt had been my leash. Grandpa's hand was steady on the table, an anchor. "If she needed the car that bad, she should have budgeted for it," he said. "That's not your job." He was right. I pressed unlink. My chest didn't cave, it expanded. By noon, we had gone through everything credit cards I'd co-signed, but never touched utilities in my name. For houses I didn't live in, even a loan agreement Melissa had quietly defaulted on. Grandpa called it fraud. I had called it family. Filing the report felt surreal, like standing in a mirror and realizing the reflection was a stranger who finally told the truth. Each step was quiet. No yelling, no confrontation. Just clicks, signatures, new passwords. But inside, the silence roared. Years of being drained cut off in a single morning. The fallout started immediately. By evening, my phone lit up like a siren. Mom first. Her voicemail was sharp, the tone she used when dinner wasn't ready. "I don't know what you think you're proving, Evelyn, but this isn't how family behaves. You're being cruel." Melissa followed with a text, a screenshot of her account. The balance, a pitiful 34.0, followed by fix. "This. Now." Paige tried. "Sweet. I don't know what's going on, but please don't punish me for things I didn't do. I just want peace." I almost laughed. The last time I told her I couldn't co-sign another lease, she rolled her eyes and ghosted me for months. But now she wanted peace. Peace that cost me, never her. Then came Dad. His voice was clipped cold, a commander whose soldier had deserted. "You're about to destroy everything we've built. Call me immediately." I wanted to scream. Everything we built, they built nothing. I had been the scaffolding, the invisible foundation. They only noticed me when I cracked. Instead of answering, I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and silenced notifications. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the room's steady calm. For once, the only thing demanding my attention was my own heartbeat. Grandpa sat across from me, arms folded, watching without pushing. When the room finally quieted, he said, "You feel that?" I nodded. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. It was something cleaner. Relief, maybe. Or the first draft of freedom. That night, I dreamed of a house with every light switched off except mine. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I thought the storm would pass once the taps were closed. That maybe silence would be enough, that if I stopped answering, stopped paying, they would eventually stop demanding. I underestimated them. People who build their lives on someone else's spine don't fold when the backbone walks away. They double down. It started with Paige. On the 4th morning in the hospital, a nurse came in looking uneasy. "There's a young woman downstairs," she said. "She says she's your medical proxy." My chest tightened. I hadn't appointed anyone except Grandpa. The nurse hesitated. "She's insisting. She says she's family." Paige, my sister who hadn't called once when I collapsed, who hadn't set foot in my room, was suddenly desperate to manage my care. She wanted control, not comfort. I told the nurse firmly, "Only my grandfather is authorized." Minutes later, security escorted Paige out. The look she shot me through the glass panel in the hallway wasn't sadness. It was fury, pure and sharp. That night, Grandpa arrived with an envelope. He sat heavily in the chair and slid it across the tray. Inside were printed emails, their subject lines crisp and sterile: petition for conservatorship. My parents were preparing to file with a local law firm. The same parents who hadn't once come to see me in a hospital bed now wanted legal authority over my life, my money, my choices. I read the lines 3 times, each word colder than the last. Evelyn demonstrates signs of instability. Erratic financial decisions. Potential trauma leading to poor judgment. Translation. She stopped paying our bills. A laugh slipped out, bitter, brittle. They weren't trying to help me. They were cornered animals clawing for the lever they'd lost. Grandpa's jaw tightened. "We'll fight it," he said, no hesitation. And the next morning, his lawyer, who became my lawyer, filed counters so fast it felt like lightning, cease and desist letters barring them from contacting my doctors, fraud alerts on every joint account, restraining barriers against assets in my name. For once, the paperwork wasn't my leash, it was my armor. But legal battles weren't enough for them. They knew how to twist narratives, how to make a wound look like their own. The first video came from Paige, filmed in her bedroom. Makeup-streaked eyes, glassy, her voice trembled just enough to seem authentic. "There's someone in our family going through something dark," she said, staring into the camera. "We've tried to help, but she's lashing out, hurting people. We just don't want to lose her." She never said my name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew who she meant. The comments poured in. "Stay strong, Paige. Praying for your sister. Mental illness is so hard." Melissa reposted it with a heart emoji captioned, "We all want peace." Peace. My phone buzzed nonstop. Old friends messaged me an alarm. A coworker emailed asking if I needed rehab resources. They were spinning my collapse into a breakdown, painting me as unstable while they posed as saints. At first, it worked. I felt myself shrinking as though the walls of my hospital room were closing in. I wanted to shout the truth, to post every receipt, every transfer, every late-night call where I saved them from ruin. But then something shifted. It started small, a single comment under Paige's video. A stranger posted a screenshot of Melissa's old Instagram caption Family Day without the drama next to Paige's tearful plea. So, where was all this love when she was actually in the hospital, the caption read. It went viral. Suddenly, the comments weren't prayers. They were questions. Strangers dug through old posts, screenshotting Melissa's vacations, Paige's boutique scams, Dad's shaky work record. Receipts surfaced, their masks cracked. People noticed the inconsistencies, their sudden public compassion versus their private cruelty. By the end of the week, Melissa's sponsorship deals were gone. Paige's online shop flooded with refund demands. Dad was suspended from work after a client forwarded him a Reddit thread dissecting his family values. And me, I hadn't said a word. All I did was nothing. Silence had turned into a weapon sharper than any defense. Still, I didn't feel victorious. Watching their empire of lies unravel was like standing across the street from a house fire. Part of you wants to run inside, part of you wants to cheer, but mostly you just feel the heat and stay very still. They weren't strangers, they were my blood. And yet the blaze didn't hurt me anymore. It just illuminated what I'd always known. I had never been inside that house to begin with. I thought maybe that would end it. Maybe exposure would force them into retreat. But people like my parents, like my sisters, don't surrender when the mirror shows their cracks. They pick up shards and start swinging. I should have known they wouldn't stop. Their empire was crumbling, their masks slipping, but instead of stepping back, they doubled down. The first strike came as a photo. My phone buzzed one afternoon, not with calls this time, but with a flood of notifications. When I opened it there, they were my entire family standing in front of our old house, a U-Haul truck in the background. Dad clutched a cardboard box like a weary soldier. Paige held up a framed photo of me as a child, ribbons in my hair, a smile so wide it hurt to look at. Melissa's caption read, "Losing everything hurts, especially when it's because your own blood turned on you. But we forgive her. She's still our sister. Family is forever." The comments section became a battlefield. Half were sympathy. "Stay strong, you'll heal. Forgiveness is powerful." The other half, brutal. "Didn't you tag her from a hospital bed last month? Family is forever until she stops paying your bills, right? You're using her childhood picture like ransom." I wanted to laugh, but the image lodged itself under my ribs. They had turned me into a ghost in my own story, a child trapped in a frame, a prop for their redemption arc. The photo wasn't meant for strangers online. It was meant for me. A lure, a guilt trip dressed as grace. 2 days later, another blow arrived, hand-delivered in a crisp white envelope. My father's handwriting, familiar and jagged, stretched across the front. I tore it open with shaking fingers, bracing for another manipulation. What I found still stunned me. It was a new will, drafted just weeks after their failed conservatorship stunt. The words were cruel in their coldness. "All assets will go to the family members who maintain unity. Evelyn is disinherited until she reconciles with the family." I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands. A bitter laugh escaped. Assets. What assets? The house was gone. Dad's job gone. Melissa's sponsorship's gone. Paige's boutique. A scam circling the drain. They had nothing left to offer but debts wrapped in empty threats. But the message was clear. Fall back in line or be erased. For the first time, I realized I didn't care about being erased. In fact, I welcomed it. I folded the letter once, slid it back into the envelope, and handed it to Grandpa. "I don't want any of it," I said. And I meant it. The next morning, my lawyer filed a reply. A legal waiver renouncing any claim to their estate. A permanent no-contact order. Documents removing them as my next of kin, my emergency contacts, my proxies. Clean, precise, final. The ties were cut not just emotionally, but on paper in ink no guilt could smudge. The backlash was immediate. Melissa's text arrived first. No hearts, no emojis this time. Just a blunt threat. "If you don't fix this, you'll regret it." Paige tried tears again, flooding my inbox with paragraphs about forgiveness and the sister bond. Mom's voicemail dripped venom, her voice cracking only when she said, "You're killing this family." And Dad, his message was just one line. "You'll be back when the world turns its back on you." But for once, their words didn't find purchase. They slid off like rain on glass. They had thrown everything shame, lies, lawsuits, legacy. And all I gave them back was silence. That silence became its own kind of echo. At first, it scared me. Who was I without their demands? Who was I without the constant noise of fixing, paying, apologizing? But as the days stretched, I found the echo wasn't empty. It was space. Space to breathe. To imagine a life where I wasn't defined by what I gave away. One evening, the nurse checked my vitals and asked how I was feeling. I surprised myself by saying, lighter. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the absence of weight. That alone felt like a kind of joy. I kept the letter not as a wound, but as a mirror, proof that their love had always been conditional, that my worth to them had always been transactional, and proof that walking away wasn't betrayal, it was survival. As I slid it into the drawer with my discharge papers, I realized something. They had disinherited me from their world, but I had disinherited them first. 2 weeks after the letter arrived, I was discharged. The nurse clipped the hospital bracelet from my wrist, its plastic snapping like a small chain breaking. My overnight bag was light, just a few clothes, a toothbrush, a notebook with Grandpa's scribbles. Everything else I had once carried, debts, obligations, unspoken apologies, was gone, left behind, with the monitors and IV poles. Grandpa was waiting outside in his old pickup, the one that smelled faintly of pine needles and machine oil. He didn't ask if I was ready. He just tossed my bag into the back seat and said, "We're going to the mountains." I didn't argue. My apartment felt too close to them, too full of shadows and unanswered calls. I let him drive. The city thinned into rolling fields, then into forests where sunlight filtered through tall pines like cathedral glass. Hours later, we reached a small cabin tucked at the edge of a quiet town. The air was different there, crisp, sharp, untainted. When I stepped out of the truck, I filled my lungs and realized how long it had been since breathing felt easy. The cabin was simple. Wood walls, a stove that ticked as it cooled, shelves lined with mismatched mugs. No buzzing phones, no echo of demands. That first night, I lay in a bed that smelled faintly of cedar and dust, and for the first time in years, I slept without waking to the sound of my phone vibrating. I dreamed of nothing at all. And when morning came, the silence wasn't heavy. It was clean. Days slipped by gently. I took a remote job, reduced my hours, and for the first time worked only for myself. I cooked simple meals, scrambled eggs with herbs, soups simmering slow on the stove. I read books I'd once abandoned mid-chapter because someone needed money, a ride, a favor. I walked trails that wound through the trees, each step shaking off old debris I hadn't known I carried. Grandpa kept his distance, but his presence was steady. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch with his coffee tapping his watch absent-mindedly, as if to remind me time still moved forward. Sometimes we'd share quiet dinners, the silence comfortable, not demanding. He never asked me to explain. He never asked me to forgive. He just let me be. Every so often, someone from the past tried to reach me. A cousin messaged on Facebook, an old neighbor sent an email, even a classmate who'd read about the drama online. They wanted to know what really happened, but I never explained, because I knew my family's version of the story would always exist, the one where I was selfish, unstable, cruel. Let them tell it. Let them keep their narrative. I didn't need to win the war of perception. I didn't need their approval anymore. One evening, I sat on the porch as the sky bled into dusk, the crickets tuning their violins. The mountains stood tall in the distance, dark against a fading horizon. I thought about the girl in Paige's framed photo ribbons in her hair, smiling wide for a family that would one day erase her. I wanted to reach back through time, pull her into my arms, whisper, "You don't have to earn their love. And when they fail to give it, you're allowed to walk away. I can't change the past, but I can honor it by choosing differently now, by not being the emergency daughter anymore, by not silencing my own body until it collapses, by not mistaking exploitation for loyalty. Peace, I've learned, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It arrives slowly in the quiet moments when the phone doesn't buzz, when the weight on your chest lifts, when you realize you're free to live without begging to be seen. And peace is worth more than being loved by people who only loved me when I was useful. Have you ever been the fixer in your family, the one they leaned on until you broke? What would you have done in my place? Drop your story in the comments below. I really want to hear it.